Episode 6. The Executive Branch, the Administrator, not the King. Welcome to the Legacy Republic. If you are new here, I want you to understand something before we dive in. This channel is not about left versus right. It is not about Team Red or Team Blue. It is about something far more foundational than any political party that has ever existed in this country. This channel is about the actual architecture of self-governance that the founders put in place, and more importantly, whether we still understand it well enough to defend it. That is what we do here. That is the mission. And if that sounds like something worth your time, you are in exactly the right place. Now, before we get into today's episode, I want to quickly orient you on where we are in the journey. This is Season 1 of the Legacy Republic, and we have structured it as a 20-episode roadmap designed to take you from the absolute ground floor of natural rights philosophy all the way through the complexities of how modern governance actually operates, and where it has drifted from its original design. We started in Phase 1 by laying the philosophical foundation. We talked about where rights come from, why the Declaration of Independence matters as more than a historical artifact, and how the Constitution was crafted as a limiting document, not an empowering one. Today we enter Phase 2, which is all about the mechanics. We are examining the three branches of government one by one through the lens of what the founders actually intended them to be. And we are starting with the one that perhaps more than any other has expanded far beyond its original boundaries. We are talking about the executive branch. This is Episode 6, and the title is The Administrator, Not the King. Let me ask you something. When you think about the President of the United States, what image comes to mind? Most people today picture someone who creates policy, who sets a national agenda, who essentially steers the direction of the country through sheer force of executive will. We talk about presidential legacies. We rank presidents by how much they changed things. We argue about whose policies were better. But here is what almost nobody asks anymore. Is any of that actually what the president is supposed to do? Because if you go back to Article 2 of the Constitution, the original blueprint, you find a description of the executive role that looks almost nothing like what we accept as normal today. The founders had just lived through the experience of monarchy. They understood, not theoretically but in their bones, what happens when executive power goes unchecked. King George III was not some fictional tyrant they invented for dramatic effect. He was a real and immediate reason why the Declaration of Independence listed specific grievances about executive overreach. So when they sat down to design the presidency, they were extraordinarily deliberate about what powers they were granting, and, just as critically, what powers they were deliberately withholding. Article 2 of the Constitution grants the president 4 core areas of authority. First, the president serves as commander-in-chief of the military. Second, the president has the power to make treaties, though this requires the advice and consent of 2/3 of the Senate. Third, the president appoints key officials, including Supreme Court justices, again with Senate confirmation. And fourth, the president is charged with faithfully executing the law that Congress passes. That last phrase is worth sitting with for a moment. Faithfully executing the laws, not creating them, not rewriting them through executive interpretation, executing what the legislative branch has already established through the constitutional process. This is the administrator function. The founders envisioned the president as the chief manager of the executive apparatus of government, the person responsible for carrying out the will of the people as expressed through their elected representatives in Congress. The power to create law, to set policy, to establish the direction of the nation that belongs to the legislative branch. Article 1. The branch that comes first in the document, not by accident but by design. Now let us talk about the Commander-in-Chief title, because this is one of the most misunderstood designations in all of American governance. Many people hear Commander-in-Chief and assume it means the president has unchecked authority over military action, but the founders were very precise here. Yes, the president commands the military once it is deployed, but the power to declare war, to authorize the use of military force, that belongs to Congress under Article 1, Section 8. This was a conscious separation designed to prevent any single person from being able to unilaterally take the nation into armed conflict. The president directs the military. Congress decides if and when the military goes to war. Two separate functions, two separate branches, no overlap by design. Think about what the alternative looks like. A single individual with the authority to both declare war and command the forces. The founders had a word for that. They called it a king, and they had just finished fighting one. Now here is where we need to have an honest conversation about where we are today versus where the document says we should be. Over the course of the 20th century and into the 21st, the executive branch has accumulated a level of power and influence that would be almost unrecognizable to the men who wrote Article 2. Executive orders, which are not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution, have been used to create sweeping policy changes that bypass the legislative process entirely. The federal regulatory apparatus, housed within the executive branch, now produces more rules and regulations in a single year than Congress has passed in decades. Wars have been fought for years at a time without a formal declaration from Congress. And the administrative state, the enormous network of federal agencies operating under executive authority, exercises legislative, judicial, and executive functions simultaneously, which is itself a direct contradiction of the separation of powers doctrine. How did this happen? It did not happen all at once. It happened incrementally, through decades of legislative delegation where Congress handed off its own authority to executive agencies rather than doing the hard work of legislating. It happened through crises, both real and manufactured, where emergency powers were granted and then never walked back. It happened through a cultural shift in how we think about the presidency itself. We moved from viewing the president as a constitutional officer with defined and limited duties to viewing the presidency as a transformational leadership role. And that shift, though it may sound like just a change in attitude, has had enormous constitutional consequences. Here is the principle we need to recover. Concentrated executive power is not a feature of a republic. It is a threat to one. The founders understood this so clearly that they built an entire constitutional structure designed to frustrate the accumulation of power in any single branch. They called it checks and balances. But checks and balances only work if the other branches are willing to exercise their authority. When Congress voluntarily surrenders its legislative power to executive agencies, no constitutional mechanism can compensate for that abdication. This does not mean the president is powerless or unimportant. The executive role is genuinely significant. Managing the largest organizational apparatus in the world, conducting diplomacy, ensuring that federal law is uniformly applied, commanding the most powerful military in human history, these are not small responsibilities. But they are administrative responsibilities. They are management responsibilities. They are not the responsibilities of a ruler who shapes the destiny of a nation according to personal vision and agenda. The founders actually debated extensively about what kind of executive they wanted. Some wanted a weaker president, almost purely ceremonial. Others, like Alexander Hamilton in Federalist No. 70, argued for what he called energy in the executive, a president capable of acting decisively when circumstances demanded it. But even Hamilton, who was among the strongest advocates for executive authority, framed that authority within the context of executing the law effectively, not creating it unilaterally. Energy in execution was the goal, not energy in policymaking. So as we move through phase 2 of this season and examine all three branches, I want you to hold on to this question. Not just what does the Constitution say, but why does it say it? Because every limitation on executive power, every requirement for Senate confirmation, every congressional check on military action, these are not bureaucratic inconveniences. They are deliberate safeguards built by people who understood from first-hand experience that unchecked power always tends toward tyranny, regardless of the intentions of the person holding it. The administrator, not the king. That is what the founders gave us. The question for our generation is whether we still value that distinction enough to defend it. We are just getting started here at the Legacy Republic, and every episode we release is building toward a fuller picture of what constitutional self-governance actually looks like and what it requires from us as citizens. If today's episode gave you something to think about, do me a favor and hit that like button right now because it genuinely helps more people find this content. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss an episode as we continue through this roadmap together. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think about the expansion of executive power. I want to hear your perspective. And if you know someone who would benefit from this kind of foundational civics conversation, share this video with them today. Thank you.